What if the feeling that something is missing in your life isn't a problem to solve, but a misunderstanding to correct? What if the absence you've been fighting, fixing, and trying to escape was never real to begin with? Neville Goddard taught something that feels almost offensive to the logical mind. You're not lacking anything. You're just looking from the wrong place. Most people spend their lives waiting for money to arrive so they can relax, waiting for proof before they believe, waiting for circumstances to change so they can finally feel whole. But the law of assumption explained reveals a brutal paradox. The waiting itself is what keeps absence alive. The moment you wait, you stand in the state where fulfillment is not yet. Neville Goddard insisted that creation is finished, Neville, meaning the life you want already exists, fully formed. The problem isn't time, effort, or worthiness. The problem is location. Consciousness is always somewhere, and where it stands determines what feels present and what feels missing. Absence is illusion, Neville Goddard warned about, because it only exists when the mind refuses to enter the fulfilled state. This is why techniques fail for so many people. They imagine, affirm, visualize, yet still feel empty. They're looking at the wish instead of living from it. The wish-fulfilled Neville method was never about convincing yourself. It was about relocation. Feeling it real, Neville Goddard means shifting where you see life from, not forcing belief. And once that clicks, everything changes. Not because you chased reality, but because you finally stood where reality has been waiting for you all along. Before anything changes on the outside, something subtle shifts on the inside, and most people miss it. They call it absence. They call it waiting. They call it bad timing. But what if the thing you believe is missing has never been gone at all? What if the discomfort you feel around money, love, or direction isn't proof of lack, but evidence that the mind is standing in the wrong place? Most people grow up hearing phrases like, "Be realistic," "Don't get your hopes up," or "When it happens, then you'll feel better." Those ideas settle in quietly. They shape how the mind looks at life. And without noticing, a person learns to look at reality from absence instead of from fulfillment. Neville Goddard would say that's not a problem of effort, it's a problem of position. The law of assumption explained simply shows that where the mind stands determines what it calls real. Here's the paradox that changes everything. The feeling of lack feels convincing only because it's familiar. It feels honest. It feels responsible. Yet Neville Goddard taught that creation is finished, Neville, meaning every fulfilled state already exists. When someone says, "I don't have it yet," they're not describing reality. They're describing a viewpoint. And viewpoints can be changed faster than circumstances ever could. Think about it. There have been moments when something you wanted suddenly felt normal before it physically arrived. The tension dropped. The urgency softened. That calm wasn't coincidence. That was the fulfilled state Neville pointed to. The wish-fulfilled Neville method was never about forcing belief. It was about relocating the mind to where the desire already feels ordinary. Feeling it real, Neville Goddard was always the key, not positive thinking or waiting for signs. Absence is illusion, Neville Goddard warned about, not because people are foolish, but because the mind is persuasive when it repeats the same angle long enough. You don't fix illusion by fighting it. You dissolve it by seeing from a different place. And once the mind enters that place, reality has no choice but to rearrange itself to match. This isn't about pretending everything is perfect. It's about understanding that fulfillment is a position, not a prize. And when someone finally sees that, money stops feeling distant. Life feels cooperative again, and the quiet sense of "it's handled" begins to replace constant effort. Neville Goddard made a profound point when he said, "All states already exist. It's not about waiting for the perfect moment or the right opportunity. It's about recognizing that everything we desire already exists within the realm of possibility." The trick, then, isn't in finding what's missing. It's in shifting the mind's focus to the fulfilled state. Think of it this way. If you were to step into a room, you wouldn't need to look for the door, the floor, or the walls. They're already there, in the same space as you. In the same way, when you move into the state of fulfillment, everything you desire aligns naturally with your inner vision. The key is entering that space first, before it appears in your physical experience. When the mind occupies the fulfilled state, absence, this feeling of not yet, dissolves. The gap between your desire and reality disappears because you've moved from the waiting space to the having space. In the law of assumption, Neville Goddard taught us that it's this simple shift in mindset that determines our experience. When you assume the state of the wish fulfilled, the world adjusts to reflect it. At this point, it's important to understand nothing needs to change on the outside. As Neville said, creation is finished. The world reflects what you believe and feel, and when the mind is firmly established in a state of already having, the universe follows suit. If you've been striving, struggling, or feeling the absence of something, shift. Don't focus on what you don't have. Focus on the knowing that it's already been created, and you are simply stepping into it. Let's dive deeper. The fulfilled state is not about believing something could happen. It's about knowing it's already happened, because the space where it exists has always been there. You don't need to pull it towards you, you simply need to step into it. It's already in the present. This is a shift in perception, a change in viewpoint that shifts the fabric of reality itself. Neville Goddard's teachings show that the mind has this immense power to create, but more than that, it has the power to enter into the state where the manifestation already exists. It's not about bringing the future into the present, but understanding that the present already contains everything, in full abundance. When you embrace the reality of this, the world around you starts to rearrange itself. People, opportunities, and circumstances, everything finds its way to you as if by magic. But it's not magic at all. It's simply the law of assumption in action. Once the mind occupies the fulfilled state, there is no absence, just presence. And this isn't about a fleeting belief. It's about deep embodiment. Feeling that you already are what you desire isn't something you do momentarily, it's something you live from. The more you practice this, the more your life begins to reflect it. And soon enough, you begin to look around and realize that the world has changed, not because you waited, but because you moved into the place where it already existed. There's a subtle trap most people fall into, and it feels completely logical while it's happening. They look at what's missing and treat it as evidence. No money yet means it's not working. No result yet means I must be doing it wrong. Neville Goddard would gently smile at this, because he knew proof never leads, proof follows. The law of assumption, explained, shows that evidence is always late to the party. Think about how habits form. You don't see muscles before you assume the identity of someone who trains. You don't see confidence before you start carrying yourself differently. In the same way, absence is illusion, Neville Goddard warned about, because it pretends to be a conclusion when it's really just a lagging indicator. The mirror reflects after you move, never before. Most people were conditioned early to believe, when I see it, then I'll relax. That sounds reasonable, but it quietly puts the mind in a powerless position. It says the world decides first, and the self responds second. Neville flipped that entirely. He taught that the fulfilled state Neville occupies creates the evidence, not the other way around. Imagine checking the oven every minute. and concluding the meal isn't real because it's not ready yet. It would be absurd, yet that's exactly how people treat their desires. They peek at reality, see no change, and mentally step back into lack. The wish-fulfilled Neville method asks for something different. Stay in the knowing, even while the process is invisible. There's a quiet maturity that develops when someone stops demanding proof. Not blind faith, calm understanding. It's the same feeling as knowing a paycheck is coming because the work is already done. Feeling it real, Neville Goddard described, often feels boring, normal, almost anticlimactic. And that's how you know you're close. When proof becomes unnecessary, tension leaves the body. The shoulders drop. The inner dialogue softens. That's not passivity, that's alignment. Creation is finished, Neville reminds us, so the need to constantly check reality is really a sign the mind hasn't fully relocated yet. Old evidence will still try to speak. Bill's silence, delays, they all belong to a previous standpoint. Arguing with them gives them power. Ignoring them with arrogance backfires too. The wiser move is neutrality. This is old information. I've already moved. This is where many people accidentally sabotage themselves. They practice imaginal scenes, then scan the world for confirmation. That scanning quietly re-enters absence. Neville Goddard taught persistence not as force, but as loyalty to the new state, even when the senses disagree. When someone truly understands that proof follows state, impatience fades. There's less emotional whiplash, less urgency. Life starts to feel oddly cooperative even before anything visibly changes. That's not coincidence, it's internal order being restored. And once this clicks, a deeper question naturally arises. If absence was never proof, what happens when the mind stops using it as reference altogether? That's where the real shift begins. Most people assume absence lives out there, somewhere in the world, in circumstances, in numbers on a screen, or in other people's behavior. But Neville Goddard was very precise about this. Absence is not external, it's positional. It's a viewpoint the mind adopts, often without realizing it. Change the viewpoint, and the world has no option but to follow. Think of a city seen from different floors of the same building. On the ground, everything feels noisy, chaotic, rushed. From higher up, the same streets look organized, calm, almost graceful. Nothing outside changed, only the angle of observation did. Absence is illusion, Neville Goddard pointed to in exactly this way. The scene never moved, the observer did. When someone says, "I don't have enough," what they're really saying is, "I'm seeing from a state where not enough is normal." The law of assumption explained reveals that reality isn't responding to words, it's responding to position. The fulfilled state Neville occupies doesn't argue with lack. It simply makes lack irrelevant. This is why fighting circumstances rarely works. Arguing with bills, timelines, or delays keeps the mind anchored to the very place it wants to leave. Neville Goddard taught that movement happens inward first. When the inner standpoint shifts, the rearrangement outside feels almost anticlimactic, as if it was inevitable all along. There's often resistance here because the mind wants guarantees. It wants assurance before relocation. But imagine refusing to sit in a chair until the room proves it can hold you. The wish-fulfilled Neville method asks for trust in placement, not in appearances. You sit first. The support follows. Feeling it real, Neville Goddard described, isn't emotional hype. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows where they are. Relief, calm, even a slight indifference to outcomes, these are signs the viewpoint has moved. Absence cannot survive there because it has no reference point. Creation is finished, Neville insisted. which means every viewpoint already exists too. You're not inventing a new reality, you're selecting a new angle. And just like a radio station, the music changes the moment the frequency does, not 5 minutes later. This is where life starts to feel different. Conversations shift, opportunities appear casually, problems resolve sideways, not because you chased them, but because the lens through which you see has changed. Reality mirrors lenses with unsettling precision. At first, the old viewpoint will try to reclaim attention. It's familiar. It feels responsible. But familiarity isn't truth. It's repetition. Neville Goddard reminded students that persistence is simply remaining where you've moved, even when the old scenery tries to reassert itself. And once someone truly understands absence as a viewpoint rather than a condition, a natural curiosity appears. If changing the angle changes the world, how does one practice stepping fully into a new one on purpose? Here's where Neville Goddard became very practical, almost disarmingly simple. He didn't ask people to imagine big, dramatic outcomes. He asked them to choose one small scene, something ordinary, that would only make sense after the desire was already fulfilled. The power isn't in scale, it's in implication. Think of it like this. Instead of imagining a bank balance flashing on a screen, imagine sitting at a cafe, relaxed, ordering without checking prices. Instead of imagining applause, imagine a friend casually saying, "I knew this would work out for you." These scenes aren't flashy, but they carry weight. They assume the end without announcing it. The wish-fulfilled Neville method works because the mind responds to position, not effort. When you step into a scene and look from it, rather than at it, something subtle happens. The body responds first. Breathing changes. The jaw unclenches. The nervous system recognizes familiarity instead of desire. Most people make the mistake of watching themselves imagine, like a movie on a screen. Neville Goddard warned against that. He taught participation. You're not observing the scene, you're inside it. You're hearing from your own ears, seeing from your own eyes. That's what feeling it real Neville Goddard actually means. At first, the mind may resist. It might say, "This is fake," or "This hasn't happened yet." That's fine. Resistance doesn't mean failure. It means relocation is in progress. Absence is illusion, Neville Goddard would remind, and illusions get louder right before they dissolve. A useful trick Neville hinted at is repetition without strain. You don't force the scene for hours. You return to it gently, like revisiting a familiar memory. 30 seconds, a minute, enough for the feeling of normalcy to register. Then you let it go. Creation is finished, Neville emphasized, so you're not building the desire. You're tuning into it, like opening an already written chapter. The scene is simply the doorway the mind uses to enter the fulfilled state Neville already exists in consciousness. What surprises most people is how quickly urgency fades when this is done correctly. The desire doesn't disappear, it relaxes. It stops begging. That calm is not indifference, it's alignment. It's the body confirming, yes, we're here now. Life may not change immediately on the surface, and that's where trust deepens. The law of assumption explained shows that the scene impresses first, rearranges second. The inner shift is the cause, the outer shift is the echo. And once someone feels that shift even once, a new curiosity appears naturally. If a simple imaginal act can relocate the mind, what exactly locks that new position in place? Neville Goddard often emphasized that imagination opens the door, but feeling is what anchors you inside the room. Without feeling, the mind visits a state briefly and then slips back to its old address. Feeling is what tells the nervous system, this is where we live now. And once that message lands, absence quietly loses its footing. Many people expect feeling to be intense, joy, excitement, fireworks. But that's not the feeling Neville pointed to. The fulfilled state Neville described feels surprisingly ordinary. It feels like relief, like calm, like the absence of internal argument. When the desire feels normal, that's the signal the mind has relocated. Think about how you feel about something you already have, like your name or your home address. There's no emotional charge, no urgency, no effort to believe. That neutrality is powerful. Feeling it real. Neville Goddard taught is not emotional hype, it's psychological settlement. This is why people sometimes think nothing happened after an imaginal act. They say, "I don't feel excited anymore." Exactly. Excitement belongs to wanting. Calm belongs to having. Absence is illusion, Neville Goddard warned about, because it keeps people addicted to emotional longing instead of emotional arrival. The body always tells the truth first. Shoulders soften, breathing deepens, thoughts slow down. These are not side effects, they're confirmations. The law of assumption, explained, shows that when the body accepts a state, reality follows without negotiation. If anxiety is still loud, it doesn't mean failure. It means the old state still has momentum, like a car slowing after you take your foot off the gas. You don't panic, you stay steady. You return to the feeling of relief, again and again, gently, without force. Neville Goddard never taught constant effort. He taught dwelling. You don't keep knocking on the door once you're inside. You rest there. Creation is finished, Neville reminds us, so the state doesn't need maintenance, only loyalty. A useful check-in question is simple. Does this feel settled? Not do I believe hard enough, or is it coming yet? Settlement is the marker. When the mind settles, absence cannot survive, because absence feeds on tension. Over time, this feeling spills into daily life. Decisions become easier. Reactions soften. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios. None of this feels dramatic. It feels sane. That's how you know the new location is holding. And once the feeling stabilizes, a new challenge appears naturally. What happens when the outer world still shows old evidence, and how do you relate to it without slipping back? Sooner or later, appearances will try to argue. A message doesn't arrive. A number doesn't change. Someone behaves exactly the way they used to. And this is where most people unknowingly step back into the old state, not because they did something wrong, but because they start negotiating with what they see. Neville Goddard was clear here. Don't debate echoes. What you're seeing in those moments is delayed sound, old assumptions finishing their exit. The law of assumption, explained, shows that reality is obedient, but not instantaneous in the way the anxious mind demands. Absence is illusion, Neville Goddard warned about, precisely because it pretends to be current information when it's actually outdated. Imagine shouting into a canyon and then running away because you don't like the echo. That's what reacting to appearances does. The fulfilled state Neville doesn't need to defend itself. It doesn't argue, explain, or justify. It simply remains. This is where emotional maturity replaces effort. Instead of spiraling, the response becomes quieter. This belongs to the old standpoint. Not denial, not suppression, just recognition. Neville Goddard taught that persistence is not repetition. It's stability. People often think they must fix what they see. Send another message. Push harder, reaffirm louder. But that urgency usually signals a slip back into wanting. Feeling it real. Neville Goddard described feels composed, almost uninterested in proving anything. Creation is finished. Neville reminds us that nothing new needs to be forced into existence. The rearrangement happens, because the state is occupied, not because the person is vigilant. Vigilance belongs to fear. Presence belongs to fulfillment. Ironically, the less you argue with appearances, the faster they dissolve. When reactions stop feeding them, they lose relevance. Old patterns need attention to survive. Without it, they fade quietly, often replaced in unexpected ways. This doesn't mean you become passive in life. You still act, speak, and choose, but from a different place. Actions become natural responses, not attempts to fix reality. That difference is subtle, but reality reads it perfectly. Neville Goddard often hinted that the world tests new assumptions, not to challenge them, but to confirm them. Will you stay, or will you retreat? Every moment of non-reaction strengthens the new position. And as this steadiness grows, something interesting starts to happen. The inner noise reduces, urgency fades, and small confirmations begin to appear, soft at first, then clearer, signaling that the shift has truly taken root. One of the earliest signs that the shift has actually occurred is not excitement but quiet. The frantic mental scanning slows down, the constant checking fades. Life doesn't feel urgent anymore, it feels manageable, even friendly. Neville Goddard taught that when the fulfilled state Neville is entered, the nervous system stops searching. People often miss this because they're looking for fireworks. But the real signal is subtle. You care less about timing. You stop rehearsing conversations. You're less triggered by delays. Absence is illusion Neville Goddard warned about, and when the illusion weakens, it stops demanding attention. Another early sign is a strange confidence that doesn't need explanation. You couldn't fully articulate why you're calm, you just are. The law of assumption explained shows that confidence is not self-talk, it's a bodily conclusion. The body knows before the mind catches up. Synchronicities also begin to appear, but softly, a conversation overheard. An unexpected email. A coincidence that makes you pause and think, that's interesting. Neville Goddard never taught chasing signs because signs follow, they don't lead. They're reflections, not instructions. You may notice that people respond to you differently. Not dramatically, but subtly. They listen more, they agree more easily. Situations that once felt resistant seem to open without effort. This isn't charisma, it's coherence. Reality responds to inner consistency. The wish-fulfilled Neville method creates a kind of internal gravity. Things start coming toward you instead of you running toward them. Opportunities don't shout. They present themselves casually, almost as if they were always meant to be there. Feeling it real, Neville Goddard emphasized, often shows up as normalcy. The desire feels less special and more expected. This is the moment many people panic and think they lost the feeling. In truth, they've graduated from wanting to being. Creation is finished. Neville reminds us that fulfillment doesn't announce itself with drama. It blends into life. It feels like, of course. And that quiet, of course, is more powerful than any affirmation. There's also a new sense that life is cooperating instead of resisting. Problems resolve sideways. Help shows up unasked. Things work out without micromanagement. This doesn't feel magical. It feels natural. And when these signs appear, the real work becomes internal restraint. Not slipping back into old habits of doubt, not reactivating absence by searching for what's missing, and allowing presence to deepen without interruption. Deep embodiment happens quietly, almost invisibly. One day you realize you haven't checked, compared, or worried in a while, not because you're disciplined, but because there's nothing to scan for anymore. The mind has stopped asking, "Where is it?" because it already knows where it stands. This is the point where absence fully loses relevance. Absence is illusion Neville Goddard spoke of because it only exists where attention feeds it. When attention rests in presence, the illusion starves. The law of assumption explained becomes lived experience rather than theory. People often think embodiment means constant awareness. It doesn't. It means the fulfilled state Neville has become default. Like muscle memory, like driving a familiar route without conscious effort. You're no longer trying to stay aligned, you simply are. There's also a noticeable shift in language. Inner dialogue changes. Instead of "I hope," thoughts naturally sound like "when" or "as I do." Neville Goddard emphasized that speech flows from identity, not discipline. You don't police words, they align themselves. Feeling it real, Neville Goddard described now, feels like stability. Emotional swings reduce. Decisions feel cleaner. You trust yourself more, not because everything is perfect, but because your internal reference point is steady. Creation is finished. Neville reminds us that nothing is being built at this stage. The bridge of events unfolds on its own timeline, often in ways the logical mind never predicted. Control fades because control is no longer needed. What surprises most people here is how little effort manifestation seems to require. The work feels done. The desire feels lived. Even before physical confirmation, the inner question has been answered. And that's why impatience rarely returns. This is also where gratitude becomes natural, not performative. You don't force appreciation, you notice it. Life feels fuller, richer, more textured. Small things register as meaningful again. Neville Goddard often hinted that this state is what people mistakenly call letting go. But nothing is being released. You haven't dropped the desire, you've merged with it. The wish-fulfilled Neville method completes itself here. And from this place of quiet wholeness, a deeper realization begins to surface, one that reframes everything you thought absence meant in the first place. At the deepest level, absence was never a condition. It was a misunderstanding, a place the mind simply forgot to enter. Neville Goddard pointed to this gently, not as criticism, but as relief. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was delayed. The mind was just looking from the wrong seat. When someone truly sees this, something inside exhales. The years of effort, affirming, fixing, and chasing suddenly feel unnecessary. Absence is illusion, Neville Goddard taught, because illusion only survives where awareness hasn't yet arrived. The moment awareness enters, the illusion collapses on its own. This is where the fulfilled state, Neville, becomes more than a concept. It becomes identity. You don't visit it. You don't return to it. You live from it. And from that place, the world doesn't need to be managed. It responds automatically. The law of assumption explained here is almost disarmingly simple. Life reflects where you stand, not what you request. The mind doesn't get what it wants, it gets what it is. And when being replaces wanting, the question of absence never even arises. Feeling it real. Neville Goddard described now feels like recognition rather than creation. Like remembering something you always knew but temporarily forgot. There's no rush, no tension, no need to convince anyone, not even yourself. Creation is finished. Neville wasn't a poetic idea, it was a literal instruction. Everything already exists. Fulfillment isn't produced, it's selected. And selection happens the instant the mind chooses a new location. This is why force dissolves here. Visualization becomes optional. Techniques become tools, not lifelines. The wish-fulfilled Neville method has done its work, not by effort, but by relocation. Life from this place feels surprisingly intimate. Events arrive naturally. Conversations land differently. Money, opportunities, and solutions feel closer. Not because they moved, but because you did. And perhaps the most freeing realization of all is this: Nothing needs to be chased anymore. What once felt distant was never far away. It was always here, waiting for the mind to step inside. From here, the only real choice left is whether to remain where you are or to drift back into old viewpoints out of habit. And that quiet choice is made moment by moment, without drama. So now the real question isn't whether this works. It's whether you're willing to notice where your mind is standing right now. When you think about money, peace, love, or direction, are you looking from absence or from presence? Are you waiting for the world to change so you can feel settled? Or are you willing to let feeling settled be the very thing that changes the world? Neville Goddard wasn't asking you to believe harder. He was inviting you to move, to stop arguing with appearances, to stop using delay as proof, to gently, consistently choose the fulfilled state and live from it, even when the senses still whisper old stories. Because once you see that absence was never real, only positional, you can't unsee it. What would shift in your life if you stopped scanning for what's missing today? What decisions would feel lighter if you trusted that creation is finished, Neville taught, and that your only task is to remain where fulfillment already is? And who would you become if you stopped waiting for permission to feel whole? If this resonated with you, stay here. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this isn't about motivation, it's about relocation. And once you learn how to move your consciousness, you'll never relate to reality the same way again.